This podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box to this episode. Patreon is a monthly subscription and you can cancel anytime. And PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.
My name is Aline, and I'm the co-founder of NaTakallam. The economic situation is so bad that really, you almost have no choice but to protest if you are part of, this portion of the population that is really being hurt very profoundly. So, I think that really does push people back to the streets because there's no way to just carry on. I mean, the Houston protests, from what I remember, were really a very small subset of the people. A lot of people weren't involved the way today, I go back to Beirut, and at 8 p.m. in Ashrafiyeh, last time I was there, everyone was on the porch with, banging the casserole, the pots and pans. And, that's pretty amazing. And people that I've never seen as people who would actually be those ones to go down and protest, going down and protesting. Of course, I say this with a little bit of, cautious cynicism, because this is what we heard with Syria. This is what we heard with Egypt. Everyone all across the, political and socioeconomic classes and religions. I think we're seeing a lot of the same and risks of this not necessarily becoming this euphoric moment that we were living right in that October 17th to end of October moment, right? That was just like ecstatic,
So in a way, it's layers of issues that have sort of lined up for the moment that have driven people to the point of potentially no return.
Yeah, and one other thing is that I also think patience is critical, right? Like no one did we really think change would come overnight or within a couple of weeks, and is change in a couple of weeks what we really want?
Yes.
Right? Because that always brings other risks as well. So again, I do speak from my Lebanese abroad position, and I've been on the quieter side, observing, trying to make sense of what's going on, and I really am in complete admiration of those on the ground. And as Lebanese expats, I think we all have this funny feeling of like, we care so much and we're invested so much, but the truth is we have an easy way out, which is a second passport and opportunities that way. And that's it's a funny feeling for me sometimes, and I have to often battle with feeling a bit of guilt to make sure that it's not guilt, but it's actually just feeling empowered that, as someone with that option, what is it that, we as the expats can do and support. But the battles are different. I think it's very important, for me, like what my cousins who don't have another passport are dealing with in Lebanon versus what I am is still different.
Yes.
And for me, it's kind of, it's just something to be aware of, I find. And I'm very much aware of that.
But I like that you've opened the door to a subject which I think is it's very important, and it perhaps is more relevant today than before, which is the diaspora's relationship to Lebanon. And we both attended a panel discussion at LAU, a week ago, I believe, and that was the subject. And you could tell that the audience was well aware that there are limitations, but at the same time that there's real desire to be involved. And that kind of opens the door to another subject, this broad issue of connectivity. And connectivity, to me, I think speaks volumes, because you don't need to be in Lebanon right now to really appreciate what's happening. And I was there the whole time. I recently left. You were there maybe 2 or 3 times, but you experienced it regardless. And I know that it's very important to see it with your own eyes, but there's many things I think you just feel that you were part of it while you're abroad. And I just want to touch on technology here and what technology has maybe allowed us to do. When you first realized what was happening, how did you first engage that information?
It was actually a friend of mine in Beirut who sent me the article on the people going down to the streets because of the WhatsApp tax.
So you received an article. That was the first.
Well, a friend on
yeah.
WhatsApp sent me the article.
Okay, right. That's my
Yeah.
point. Yeah. So WhatsApp was the sort of delivery. Okay.
Yeah. So I was in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I had just arrived from Paris for a conference. And so I was busy preparing for the conference. And then I was just talking to my girlfriend, a friend of mine, and I was like, how are things going? And she's like, oh, well, look at this. And so that's, it was a friend who then pointed me to this article. I think it was, I don't know.
And where was your friend?
She was in Lebanon.
Okay, so this is perfect. I didn't know any of this, and I'm glad you're describing it. That's the fundamental difference to me, is that you are on a flight from Washington, D.C.
From Paris to Washington.
So from Paris to Washington, D.C., you're flying in the opposite direction of Lebanon, right? And you land in America, and you get a WhatsApp message from your friend in Lebanon sharing with you protests that are underway. That is special, and I don't think it's really I don't think it's thought through properly that the world is so connected right now that you're always caught up with what's happening in Lebanon, and you can react to it on a whim. How long was it from that message to the flight to Beirut?
Well, so it was, I saw the protests. I didn't react too much. And then the next day, I was on the train from D.C. to New York. And then someone sends me the photo of, the kiddie pool that was set up amidst the protests. And I think it was in Sindelfil, a photo of
Within days, I think, of the...
So, I mean, I think, I think this was a Thursday or Friday. And then on the Saturday, everyone had gone down to the streets. And it was like the protests, but like Lebanese party style. And I was very confused. I was trying to follow, but I was very much focused on my conference as well. And then...
But distracted.
But super distracted.
Yeah.
And my friends on WhatsApp start sending me photos of this is what's going on in Lebanon. And I get to New York, and I had a couple of days in New York before going to a conference in San Francisco. I was kind of on my autumn string of conferences in the States. And people are sharing with me, and I was cautious, right? So my excitement was very reserved in the beginning, just because, anyone who's really followed closely what's happened in the region and was so excited about these incredible uprisings that shook the world in 2011. I mean, when we think of how I remember watching Occupy Wall Street, people talk about how they were inspired by Egyptians, right? This reverse thing, I think a lot of us and a lot of people who were very enthusiastic about what happened in 2011 have just become very careful. Again, also with the You Stink protests, there was a bit of excitement, and then, that died out. So I was very, just looking at this and very, I'm not sure what's going on. This feels a bit, almost like, it just feels very Lebanese, like partying, and what's going on behind it. And I was trying to maybe get some input from people. And everyone that I was talking to was just really excited, and just clearly it seemed like an incredible moment, but more like a Woodstock moment.
And who were you engaging mostly when you were getting that information, or how were you living the moment while you weren't in Lebanon? And I mean it in a really basic way. Were you using social media? Were you turning to Lebanese TV stations? Like, how were you accessing that?
More directly talking to friends.
So just literally
on WhatsApp.
Connecting with friends and having conversations with these friends.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a former, someone who's worked a bit in journalism, worked a lot in, everything related to information and data. Actually, I did a bit of my work at SIPA, at Columbia on that. I don't know really how much I like the news and media. I'd rather talk to trusted sources that are my friends and people who I find are very knowledgeable of the Lebanese political scene. And that's the people I connect with. And also talking to my family, who might not be people who love to talk about politics or analyze things going on, because they kind of want to forget the politics and move on with their lives, and then hearing their feedback. So for me, it's more getting the feedback from people who are on the ground, people are there in the protests, and of course, grabbing a few headlines here and there. But I'm more of I like to talk to my people, my friends who are very involved on the ground.
I think there's no perfect segue to link what you're describing, conversations, and connectivity, to what you do. Because that is the essence of your whole career at the moment.
True.
In a sense, it's even in the name, NaTakallam. And I think of NaTakallam, which as we speak, more than just conversations, obviously. It requires a level of connectivity that is of the moment. This couldn't have been done 20 years ago, or let alone maybe even 10 years ago. It would have been a difficult accomplishment. Now we take it for granted that this can be done. What is the idea born out of? Is it the Lebanese experience? Is it the regional experience? Is it just your own personal willingness to engage a wider audience? What took you to do that? And then we can sort of get into where it is today.
You know, it is the sum of all these things, and obviously a very, very direct product of my experience as a Lebanese who grew up in New York. So basically, NaTakallam is a social enterprise that provides an income to displaced people, and more recently, displaced people in host communities, by leveraging the gig economy and their language skills to provide them with remote work opportunities that are all related to language and culture. So teaching a language, translating work, and even doing virtual exchange sessions. And they're all related to also conversations, dialogue, understanding, and building bridges. And of course, you know, I've watched what's going on in Lebanon, heartbroken. And my goal when actually I brought NaTakallam to life was to actually make sure, you know, we find a way for Lebanon to remain stable and think of ideas that Syrians can access an income without directly taking it from the Lebanese, right? That was the fundamental idea that I was thinking of in 2014. But of course, seeing what's going on today in Lebanon and seeing the dire economic situation, and also knowing how many people out there are interested in Lebanese dialect, and how many mothers who are Lebanese want their children to speak Lebanese dialect, we've decided, and you know, I've decided personally, from, you know, the amount of effort I can put in running a startup and a social enterprise, which is quite consuming, is that, you know, we have actually, it makes perfect sense today, in light of the fact that Lebanon also hosts the highest density of refugees per capita in the world, to launch NaTakallam sessions with Lebanese in Lebanon.
Is that because of what's happening to the country right now? That because the economy is so bad that you're in a way expanding beyond the Syrian refugee population?
So I mean, we've already
or is it genuine curiosity in the Lebanese dialect from people abroad?
It's a combination, right? Because when you're a social enterprise, you know, we're not depending on being passive recipients of something. There's a two-sided market here.
Right.
So, you know, it's, first of all, you know, we're working beyond Syrian refugees already, right? Displaced Iraqis, Yemeni, Palestinians who are still refugees.
But they all tend to be displaced populations.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
The Lebanese are not in that category.
No,
right.
But also in the refugee ecosystem, most organizations have now all made it part of their mandate to work with refugees and vulnerable communities of the host population.
I see.
So, of course, we're a little bit different. We're gig economy, we're on the internet, so it's slightly different. But with all these factors in mind, and the fact that we know people want to support Lebanese, want to find ways to support Lebanese from abroad, and want to learn Lebanese dialect. So this was a decision that is, again, a practical decision, but also a very sensitive decision to what's going on, and a sustainable way also to support.
Right.
You know?
And it's born out of the moment, that because of what's happening on the ground?
Yeah.
When is it in effect? When will it be launched?
So as of March 2020, people can sign up for sessions with Lebanese to practice
Are you going to
Lebanese
sign up
dialect.
yourself?
Oh my goodness. I almost signed up last week because we're testing our new platform.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity. Actually, when I WhatsApp with some of our Syrian tutors, you know, to talk about something, or they're always writing to me in Arabic, and they're like, Yalla, Aline, when are you signing up? We need to work on your Arabic. So, you know, like, the idea of NaTakallam was because I needed to practice my Arabic, but I've had, the chaos of running NaTakallam prevents me from actually signing up.
That would be very
But,
funny if that's how it ends.
But
like-
actually, no, I'm really, and I've even thought about it a bit for Spanish because I like to brush up on my Spanish. I'm always in such admiration when I see student profiles, fully American. They write their whole email in Arabic. They're so
Right.
brilliant in Arabic, and I'm like, wow.
They
this
are
is
maybe,
shameful.
I mean, I don't want to. I'm not going to speak ill of them, but I'm assuming this is just an assumption that they're great at writing, and they can't have a conversation. And I don't know if you is that a typical.
I don't have conversations with them. I just see their emails.
You
but
just see right.
Yeah.
But I mean, in your experience, is that a sort of a standard situation where somebody is trained properly to read
For
and
sure.
write?
I mean, of course, people who have gone through the academic process
Yeah,
of learning, they probably are very good at writing and
Yes,
reading.
yeah.
But of course, conversation, right? There's nothing you won't learn a language if you don't converse, if you don't
Absolutely.
practice, if you can also play games and learn languages. Like that's really popular today, but you're not going to get the nuances and the human side of things, right? And NaTakallam, in essence, what we really feel is interesting about us is like people see us as a tech startup, but we're really it's like a very human tech startup, I would say, and
Right.
that's something we really love. And there's nothing, even though the goal of NaTakallam is to, in the most basic sense, provide income to people, what seems to always transpire as the most powerful is the human connections and friendships they make.
Which, you know what? It seems, in my own experience, that is always lacking in the classical Arabic instruction. That there's less
Interesting, yeah.
social component. You can literally, you can sit in a library, learn it, and master it,
Yeah.
and never actually use it for anything beyond that.
Yeah.
And conversation, for better or worse, you don't write it. You need to talk it out. You need the human exposure.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, you need to immerse yourself with people that speak that dialect. It's very difficult to learn it just by sitting alone and watching TV and sort of just trying to second guess it. You
Yeah.
need to actually experience it.
Yes, absolutely. The idea was kind of a little bit of a light bulb moment. So as a Lebanese who grew up in New York, in a Francophone household, I grew up speaking more French and English, and Arabic has always been my weaker language. And, I did, Arabic classes on the weekends and AUB summer sessions.
Well, that's why you don't speak Arabic at the AUB summer sessions.
Ronnie.
I'm kidding. We're both from, it's fine. I think you went to AUB as well.
Yeah, I did some
Okay,
Arabic.
so we can
yeah.
both trash it just enough. Yeah.
So, but and of course, very much familiar with the whole discrepancy with Americans studying Fusha, coming to Beirut, and then not being able to talk to the cab driver, etc. And when I lived in Lebanon, I did quite a bit of Arabic. I focused on Ammiya, the dialect. And I got to a point where, for me, what really mattered is just maintaining my conversational Arabic. And I was trying to do that from New York. So I had graduated from my master's here at Columbia, and I was job hunting, and I had all this free time, and I wanted to work on my Arabic. And I was trying to find ways to do that here in New York, but tutoring was super expensive, and the classes were all focused on Fusha. And at the same time, most people, I had been more in the journalist circle, in the humanitarian circle, people who want to learn Arabic, they go to Damascus, right? You immerse yourself in Damascus, of course, pre-war Damascus, but you can't immerse yourself in Beirut as much, right? So that had always been a dream of mine that could no longer happen. And I was also watching the news. Like, it was one morning in September. I'm just watching the headlines and just seeing the number of Syrians in Lebanon and the situation for them, and the fact that, Lebanon is a fragile state. Lebanon does not let Syrians work in the local economy for the most part. I do understand why that is, but at the same time, what do you do when you have all of these people who are stuck there and don't have ways to access an income?
But you decided to gauge that world from here, from abroad.
Right,
Now,
yeah.
Can I ask you, I mean, for me, it's a very bold step, which is I'm going to find a way to do two things: to improve conversation skills and also find the means to, in a way, help a very difficult situation.
Right.
So it's almost like you're solving your own, in a way, dream, and using it as a way to perhaps
Exactly.
improve. Yeah, but does that come from just being in SIPA in Colombia? Like where does the idea come from? Because I like that you're describing yourself that you are in a way forced to deal with many languages, and you're also forced to deal with a classical language that's not of any use to you, and you just want to have people speaking their dialect. But where
It's
does
very
that?
practical,
So
right?
the practicality,
very
where does it come from?
I mean, I don't know. I think I probably have very pragmatic, practical tendencies. I'm a very, maybe that's the more like American side of me. I don't know, but
Because you're saying a light bulb moment, and I see it. I know exactly what you're
Right,
describing.
yeah.
But I would never.
and very often startups come to life that way, right? Uber story. It was
So
a guy
you
who was
put
waiting
it-
for a cab in the rain,
Right.
and he thought of if or something like that.
So it's more in that way of looking. It's using technology for the moment.
Yeah, it really was grounded in two things. It's like, I want to practice my Arabic, and I'd actually always dreamed of practicing in Damascus,
And you can't go there.
and I can't go there. At the same time, I was watching the news, and I was just like, how can this be? And I was actually, I had a lot of friends, Syrian friends. I knew the type of people who were in the streets in Damascus, who were marching for basic rights, etc. And so I could also see how difficult it must be, and also just like what a loss of human capital. All these people, like highly qualified people, and what, we're just gonna leave them there, and then what, they're gonna take the Mediterranean route and have, I don't know what percentage of surviving that. It was, for me, it's just, we cannot just leave this like this and let it happen. And at the same time, so it was this combination of these two ideas.
So it really is a personal story as well. I mean, the idea is born from your own personal curiosity, as well as that kind of the technicalities that you honed in maybe through education, but also just being here in New York
Yeah,
gave you that kind of.
I don't think
Yeah.
it was related to my education per se. It was related to what I care about, and my belief that we should find solutions. That there had to, because I was also concerned for Lebanon. I was concerned for
Yeah.
Lebanon. I'm concerned for the Syrians. I'm concerned for the region. You just look at the Middle East today.
It's an out of the box problem solving idea, and I like it. Actually, I like the.
It's not conventional.
It's
Yeah.
not conventional, and there's enough curiosity to let you maybe try something that hasn't been tried before, and it seems so very straightforward.
It's very simple.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Very simple.
and I think the fact that it wasn't done before may also be the level of connectivity we have today.
Of course. Yeah.
Allows for these ideas to flourish now.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
you're at the sort of the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the original idea was like, if I were in Lebanon, I could actually connect with these, with a Syrian tutor, and maybe they can't get a job there, but they could be my tutor.
Right.
And I also believe that I have tutored French and English myself, and I think that there's a really powerful relationship you can get in a one-on-one setting, teaching someone something, and you can also get to know them and hear their story, which I think really is critical and important to changing people's minds about the other. So, it was that combination, but then realizing, oh, but wait, we have Skype today. Oh, wait, I Skype with Neta all the time. Why couldn't, I could Skype with my tutor. And also having had access to also programs where we're like, why don't you learn a language over Skype? So just the series of these things combined together, and that's when I had that idea.
You're opening the door to the other subject. How are you able to guarantee that Skype will be friendly enough there in Lebanon?
Yeah.
Given all the constraints.
Yeah.
And basic constraints. I mean, electricity, forget the internet connection. How do you guarantee that you'll have that consistency?
Well, of course, it was a challenge in the beginning that we've kind of found ways to work around. But no, I mean, Lebanon has internet issues. And whenever when you sign up to NaTakallam, you're given a little bit of like a guidelines document where you're told like,
This is part of the
please
story.
know
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
your tutor might be in circumstances
Right.
that are beyond their control and impacts their connectivity. This doesn't really happen very often because we also, NaTakallam is not a charity. NaTakallam
Right.
is an enterprise.
Yeah.
We're delivering a service. So whoever becomes a tutor on our platform also understands and agrees that they have a responsibility to try and make sure that if they have a session booked,
Right.
they're going to be at the right time, at the right moment to get that connection.
So it's really they need to they need to, in a way, alleviate those concerns also.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the Syrians who are kind of similar to us, they like the internet and the smartphone is the lifeline, right? We live, anyone working on tech and refugee issues has heard like this is the era of the connected refugee. Smartphones are lifelines. People care more about their smartphone and their subscription to a phone line than about aid and about food, right? They stay in touch with their family.
I've heard those analogies, but do you echo those sort of?
Absolutely, within a certain subset of the refugee community. And, we talk about refugee as if it's like one monolithic,
Sure.
entity, but, there's refugees of all different socioeconomic classes. A refugee who's in a camp in Greece versus a refugee in Hamra versus a refugee who got to Paris.
Yes, though.
Different,
It's, again, some things I don't know enough about. I mean, statistically, how many of the refugee population, let's use Lebanon in particular, have regular access to a smartphone? Is it a sizable figure?
I think so. This is something that's hard to find. I think that a few times when we've tried to look up on the Syrians, it was almost 1 out of 2.
That's a big number. So
Yeah.
and then you're looking at it as, okay, we're going to focus on this community. We can assess that there's enough people that have access and therefore could help. And
Absolutely.
so there's never been a concern that this is even there's no hindrance there, that the smartphone is taken for granted almost, that at least half the population has a smartphone. Wow, that might be the biggest part of the story, is that you can speak to. I mean, you don't need to. It's not difficult.
No,
it
isn't.
You can engage a displaced person.
Yeah, you can hear their
Instantly.
story. You can support them in different
And
ways.
support
You
them,
can
yeah.
have a conversation. I mean, our cute little tagline. One of them is like, "Start a conversation." Just start a conversation.
Right.
Conversations are the most powerful thing out there. I'm a firm believer in that. And again, one thing I do want to say is the word refugee is a very, in my opinion, a really tough word and complicated word, and it comes with a lot of baggage today. So I do want to mention that when I use it with kind of a grain of salt to generalize a population that's had to flee their home.
Yeah.
But that I believe that today this word is really can be a little bit destructive as well. So I just like to acknowledge that whenever I talk about NaTakallam.
It's conversations and in the dialect. And I think you're also maybe touching on something which I've always thought of in the background, that classical training is no longer that important.
In Arabic?
In Arabic. And I don't mean it in that it's, obviously it serves a function, and obviously it's the means of standard communication. The written word is in classical Arabic. But you're describing a world where there's not much writing. And I think connectivity, you don't need to write. I mean, you do, obviously there is some content, yes, but I'm going to sort of parallel example the protests that we saw for 4.5 months. It's nice that you had an article sent your way and you were perhaps texting and that. My experience was very little content, very little written word, mostly just imagery, video, audio, and I could live the experience that way. And obviously it's conversations with protesters. Here you have a population, and it would be very strange to approach them in classical Arabic and ask them to start conversing in Fusha to a foreign audience. And I think it's just, you're touching on something which I think maybe is sometimes shied from, which is just embrace the dialect. Be proud of it.
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting. The Arabic learning realm. There are people who still and rightfully so. Will choose the Fusha, the classical, but dialect, of course, is really becoming more and more embraced as well, and is important. And the truth is, yes, the idea for NaTakallam was conversation. Like, let's start conversations, and of course, we naturally, in the startup lingo, you pivot or you just naturally grow. And we now, of course, Fusha is an option with NaTakallam.
Oh, it is? Okay.
We have a
Yeah.
structured curriculum.
Yeah.
And we do actually provide full-on, very structured, both Fusha and even structured, like colloquial.
Can I ask you, just in terms of numbers, is the dialect figure always higher? Do you sense that there's more demand for?
A little bit, yeah, and we've added, Iraq. We work with Iraqis and Palestinians and Yemeni, and so people come in with slight preferences.
Right.
So it's interesting to see that, but a lot of the people using NaTakallam are traveling, and because they work in the field or they're journalists or. They are looking for the conversational side of things, and the original idea was NaTakallam is a complement to Fusha, right? So if you've studied Fusha, but now we actually have our own, opportunity to learn Fusha as
Right.
well.
Now, you said journalists are using NaTakallam?
Mostly young professionals who are focused on the Middle East or who are coming back from the Middle East or who are originally from, the Arab community.
Okay, so
have
there is a bit
roots.
of your own experience in that story
Absolutely,
too.
yeah,
People like you that
absolutely.
want to,
And then we do have formal partnerships with universities and schools,
okay.
so those are our students.
Right.
So
I'm curious, your experience today as a Lebanese social entrepreneur in the U.S., can you give any advice to someone in Lebanon let's say the Lebanese that cannot, and you said it well, your cousins and anyone that you know that is not able to get out, let's say, and want to pursue a career abroad. Can something like this exist today in Lebanon? Can you see something like NaTakallam or anything like that emerging in Lebanon today, given all the uncertainty and the constraints Lebanon is going through?
I do think there is hope in startups and social enterprises. I see them as an important component, especially in the Middle East, where we see governments that are not really supporting, if not simply hurting, their population. So I'm a firm believer that entrepreneurship and startups and social entrepreneurship do have a role to play. I am not a fan of the hype around startups and social entrepreneurship. It's become very hyped up. And there is a hype and glorification of entrepreneurs and this, startup founders, which I find is problematic. And I think people should, if they have an idea, they should do their research. If they think that nothing else is out there and there's a value to add, do what you can to explore and pursue it. But I think people sometimes, there's this drive to create something. And I mean...
Is the hype universal here in the U.S. and in Lebanon?
The whole world is crazy about startups, right? Like, it's so in fashion and social startups and,
But the disadvantage to the hype is that people think it's easy.
I think, and there's this obsession that, everyone can launch a startup. Everyone can become an entrepreneur.
Right.
The truth is it's very hard, and I owe a lot of what we've been able to do with NaTakallam to being a dual citizen.
I see. So you're acknowledging that as a Lebanese today, with a creative mind and that kind of social entrepreneurial spirit, that you still have a severe disadvantage by not being able to do this abroad.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially depending on what is your sector. When you say entrepreneur, an entrepreneur is someone who's opened a small shop. That's an entrepreneur. But, of course, when we say entrepreneur, we tend to think startup entrepreneur of something that's going to scale massively, or social entrepreneur. And really depending on your market and what your industry is, I think there's different things. But for sure, I mean, a lot of startups travel and pitch and go to these big conferences, and just having an American passport has let me do that, right?
Whereas, so it's the access to that kind of market in a way.
Absolutely,
That's really
to those settings, to those markets.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that, no, it's impossible when you're Lebanese. And there is a startup ecosystem in Lebanon, and there's been a lot of, great things coming out of it and great efforts. And Egypt is quite vibrant, and of course, Dubai. But there tends to be this obsession with that will solve everything. I just think things always need nuance. And I really want to warn people about that. And being a founder and a startup founder is very hard. And it's I think there's a glorification also. And I also think, I think
I like that you're saying this because I don't hear this enough. This sort of like celebration of the big names and sort of that's it. You just need to aim to the top and you'll get there without appreciating the very difficult journey.
The difficult journey and also the whole team, right? Like, people focus on founders, and my co-founder and I am speaking for both of us, my co-founder Reza, we've found that a bit unfortunate because, yes, we're kind of leading things, but, it's the followers that make what you are, and it's, everyone working at NaTakallam, and even our students and even clients who decide to work with us, like every single company today could work with NaTakallam, but for language services, for and not every single, but thousands, hundreds of thousands. But who are those people that I think deserve the recognition? The one who've decided to push and go back to their manager and be like, why don't we consider NaTakallam for translation services? Because when you choose NaTakallam, you're actually giving a lifeline to refugees who might be completely cut off, instead of just sticking to your traditional. So those, there's so many different actors that contribute to making something, and there is an obsession with the founders sometimes.
I'm guessing that takes years to build. It's not something that can be built overnight.
Right, and patience and time. And the other problem with the startup world is this complete obsession with fast returns, fast growth. But
that was actually my other question about Lebanon. Is that expected from the get-go there, that it should be quick returns, fast? Is that part of the problem there, that you don't, maybe there's not enough, for good reason, maybe people are not patient enough to let things grow slowly because of the situation, because people are not able to necessarily wait it out?
I think it's I don't know if it's just specific to Lebanon, but in the startup, for-profit startup world, there is a sense of constant, you got to grow fast and you got to grow and scale with mass,
You've experienced this in the U.S. as well. It's not just
right. I don't know if you can really isolate and make a difference between Lebanon and the U.S., for example. I think what would be more particular to Lebanon is just you're operating in such uncertainty. The banks, the access to capital, the stability, the internet, actually fundamentally basic aspects. You're having to go around all of these challenges. And on top of it, if you're Lebanese or, if you're from countries where you can't easily travel, just, going through the process. I've been around founders who could not travel. They didn't get the visa in time and they missed the competition. They missed the pitch. Right. And how do you win a competition when you're pitching from Skype and everyone is, there are fundamental, differences there to acknowledge. And I'm blessed a million times to have been able to benefit from my networks in New York and in Lebanon and even in Paris, and my dual citizenship to help bring NaTakallam to life.
I've known you for perhaps 13 years, maybe even a little longer. And every conversation we've had, I think, has revolved around this subject in some form or another. And Lebanon always seems to be in the background of what we're talking about. And it's nice to see that 13, 14 years later, we're both, in a way, doing similar things, although you're at a much more sophisticated level. But this connectivity and conversation collection, I think, is important. And I think people are talking more than they used to in Lebanon about things that matter. That's very important. And the diaspora is also talking to Lebanese at home and abroad. And the whole issue seems so much more connected than it used to be. And the conversations seem to be more productive. And the last time I saw you was in Martyrs Square, where just people were literally discussing their problems together. Tense discussions, politics in Martyrs Square, and every one of those venues was beaming it across the world, sharing their conversations with everyone that wanted to tune in. For me, that's magical to see that happen. On that note, Aline, I thank you for coming up 90 blocks to make sure you came to where we agreed to meet, even though a Columbia professor suggested you meet in Midtown, but you made it back up to Columbia to do this, and I hope we keep having these conversations down the road. Thank you, Aline.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks for listening, and a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.